Hello and welcome to ET Auto. I'm Nabil A. Khan, and today we are starting a new series, Pressing the Restart. In this series, we'll try to find out have we really pressed the restart, though the industry has limped back to the production, but how much of the production have we achieved in the last 1 month? And what are the hindrances? What are the challenges? And how is the consumer sentiment? What the government policy is bringing to the table when it comes to automobile sector? And who could be better than the president of Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers to begin this series. I'm glad that I'm joined by Mr. Rajan Vadera, who is president of Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, which is known as SIAM. He has a very varied, career in automotive space. He was earlier chairman of CII National Committee on Technology and R&D. Now he is chairman of Future Mobility and Battery Storage. He is going to give us a real sense what is happening in the automobile industry, be it from the supply side or be it from the demand side. Thank you so much, Mr. Vadra, for joining ET Auto.
Thank you, Nabil. My pleasure.
It's always pleasure talking to you, the kind of experience, the kind of expertise you have in this domain. Over 3 decades, if I am not wrong, you have been involved with automotive industry, and there are very few mind who has worked across the length and breadth of this sector, be it R&D, marketing, sales. Your last position, you were heading Mahindra Automotive. Also, you were CEO of Mahindra Automotive. Now you are advisor at Mahindra and Mahindra. Looking at the current scenario, can you give us a quick, brief idea where are we standing today when it comes to automobile industry or automotive value chain?
Okay, Nabil, as you know, the month of May, which just closed by, we don't have the full official picture from all the members of the data, but from the press releases and the media that we have collected as SIAM, we should be getting very shortly the official data from all the members. The industry had a degrowth of 88%, and I think that was expected. That it will be like that after zero sales in April. I think what is important also is to understand the last year. So if you see the last year there was a huge degrowth, and in all the segments, particularly the commercial vehicle segment, degrowth was huge. And in that background, we were anticipating that we will do better this year, but then what is looming ahead of us. So with about 18 to 35% degrowth in various segments last year, this year the way it has started, it is going to be very, very difficult to even perform to last year's level. GDP, as the RBI governor said, there will be degrowth. And if there is a degrowth of the order of 1 to 2%, which I don't believe, I think it will be little more than that, then what we are talking of is auto industry will degrow from maybe 25 to some 40-45%. Now with that, and the FY22 years, that kind of a degrowth, we will be actually back to levels of a decade earlier, 2010, we'll be back to those kind of levels, which would mean practically only 50 to 60% capacity utilization. So that is the scenario as of now. We are hoping to do better than that. But from the sentiments, from the data, and the model that we have in terms of predicting the auto, those are the kind of figures that are looming ahead of us.
You also talked about GDP going into negative, even more than what is being anticipated by various research agencies. What are the key reasons that you see? How long do you see the situation to populate? The industry has taken steps to restart the productions. Do you really see there are hindrances that is coming on way when we go to the production or resume production? what is the current level of capacity utilization compared to the capacity utilization that we had just before the COVID?
Okay, so Nabila, of course, the biggest problem that we have just now is of the supply chain, which is a big hindrance to the smooth production. So obviously for us resuming operations under the new safety protocol that we have to follow, that is the biggest challenge. And this means we have to put up the safety infrastructure at all the member plant location offices. It also means changing habits of people. It means it will result in operation of very limited capacities. Even after 90 days now, we have not attained more than 25 to 30% capacity utilization. So there is a start-stop kind of a scenario arising because the workforces are getting infected on the shop floor. They are infected at home. They are infected as they're coming back. Some of the migrants are coming back, So this entire thing is going to lead to sanitation, re-sanitation of the plant. All this is going to be a big nightmare for smooth supply chain. See, the tier 2 and the tier 3 are actually much more affected. They actually hit the most. First, their affordability for such kind of a protocol, the space that they have, and the number of people that work in per square meter. So all this is going to lead to entire supply chain challenges. And God forbids if there is another lockdown as a consequence of numbers going up, we are going to be in a very bad state. And on top of it, if you're producing for what? You're producing for the market. And if the market remains suppressed, again, then you cannot build up inventories. Then the problem is of the cash cycle, So right now, this is a big issue in front of us. And also, working capital availability right now, it may not be a problem because the level of production is not more than 20 to 30% capacity utilization.
20 to 30% capacity utilization compared to pre-COVID era, not
yes,
of the
yes,
full
yes.
capacity.
That's because most of our members are right now on a single shift basis.
You talked about that some migrant workers are coming back to join the factories, but the numbers would be very less. Can you give us a sense of what kind of numbers you have?
No.
And what is the action plan to bring them back?
No. It's just a very small, very, very small number. Or we are just seeing that, it's insignificant to the numbers required to come back.
What kind of challenges do you really have a manpower crunch at the plant, or how big is this challenge, and what is the action plan to bring back those migrant workers?
At the moment, the production levels are so low, you will not find the challenge, But as we start ramping up, the numbers start increasing. I guess the migrant laborers will come back. And mostly, the migrant labor is not the permanent labor in most of our members. But what happens is, if you look at the automotive chain, which means component suppliers as well as the dealers. Dealers are localized. So therefore, the workforce is very local. Hardly any migrant workforce is there with dealers. But with the suppliers, vendors, they do have a lot of migrant workers, largely in the area of as temporary workers. And to that extent, there will be constraints. But I guess till at about 40 to 50% capacity utilization, we may not face the problem. And I think by that time, if we reach to that level, even the migrant workers would come back.
Okay. So you think manpower is not going to be a problem? How do you see some kind of shift in customer?
Manpower is going to be a problem on the other side. In case we do not have demand, then manpower is going to be a problem. We don't know what to do with that man.
Okay, that's the problem that you're hinting at. That could be another bout of retrenchment that we can see in the automotive industry.
No, see, if you're operating at 50 to 60% capacity utilization, that is not the capacity utilization where you break even. Your break even is even higher than 50-60% capacity utilization. So therefore, what do you do with the manpower? And see, it's going to be a very serious problem. And we've been trying to talk to the government that to help us to generate demand. You see, we are 49% of the manufacturing GDP and 35% as per the new series. You have 37 million people who are working from end to end. We contribute 15% of the total GST collection to the government, which means 1,50,000 crores of GST is collected every year. And if there is a 50% drop of sales, you mean there's a drop of 75,000 crore. It's a lots and lot of money. And we've been trying to talk to the government and impress upon them to come up with stimulus package for generating demand. So
how do you see the package that has been offered by the government? That's 20 lakh crore, and they had claimed to have something for the MSME and for the other corporations. How much it has really resulted into real impact on the automotive industry?
Nabil, what has happened is the package that was announced by the finance minister, obviously there is a focus towards MSME, NBFCs, agri sector, and we believe all these measures will benefit the automotive sector indirectly in the medium term. But what is needed immediately is a stimulus which is required to boost the demand, which has not happened. But we remain very strong in our resolve. And as before, as an industry, we are working out ourselves how to stimulate the consumer demand. And we are also continuing the engagements with the government on our very specific expectations that we have, which is related to reviving of the demand, because we can see in China, we can see in France, in Europe, you can see that new vehicle purchases are getting as much as 10,000 RMBs in China. In France, they are giving huge, almost 5,000 euros for buying an electric vehicle. If you want to replace an existing ICE vehicle, you're getting a scrappage bonus of 3,000 euros. So what we are seeing is that countries worldwide are aware of the fact that post-COVID demand won't be there, and there is a need to, stimulate the demand. And so therefore, while government has expressed to us that GST reduction is a matter of state also, and I think under the current circumstances, their ability to impress upon states to reduce GST is not there. But then you see, we've been always telling them in the past, in the year 2008, 2014, when we had slump, there was this reduction of the excise duty, which actually helped to generate the demand. And we're looking at it as a temporary stopgap arrangement of 6 to 8 months, cannot be permanent. Auto industry is taxed. It's the second highest tax industry after cigarettes. An average starts at 28%, goes up to 60%. And if you count the registration, the road tax, along with that, then it is close to 70%. And let me tell you, auto industry, contrary to the popular belief, is not only cars. It is seen as a fashionable status industry. This industry is a service industry that provides, look at two-wheelers today. Today, people are buying two-wheelers because they want to commute between 2 points. They want to commute faster, better, at a higher frequency. Even in rural areas, motorcycles, scooters today are necessities. It's a utility item. It is not a status item. Three-wheelers are moving cargoes. Small four-wheelers are moving cargoes. LCVs, high commercial vehicles, all these are moving cargoes. There are lots and lots of jobs that are dependent on this. So majority of the auto industry, if you see, is very, very functional, utilitarian. It contributes to the nation's growth. But look at the taxation that is there, very high taxation. I can understand government's compulsions, but at those levels of taxation, there is a direct link between demand and price. There is a, price elasticity. And we feel that if there is a reduction in GST by 10 percentage points, we feel the demand will definitely soar up. And I think such examples are being given of late also. There are recommendations to the real estate industry saying that if real estate industry drops its prices, maybe they will start selling the inventory they have in the hand. So I think we have auto industry makes a profit of on an average maybe 4% to 9% is the PAT of auto industry. But for every vehicle that the auto industry sells, I think government gets 28 to 50% GST. So that's the kind of difference, So our affordability to drop further prices is far low than government's affordability to drop the GST. So we are in discussion. Government has been listening to us on many fronts, many fronts. We have talked together. We have framed the policy guidelines together. So we remain hopeful, So we still want to talk on this issue.
Of course. Optimism is the biggest medicine in time of despair. That is always there. But if I come back to your analogy that automotive industry should be considered as goods, a necessary item, not as a luxury item that is seen. But we cannot have blanket, cover. Like we can classify, like maybe truck and vehicles which are involved in activities carrying goods, necessary goods, etc. They might be given a leverage, but government in a difficult time like this has to have a fund to support some social, initiative that the government is taking also. And automobile industry, you just mentioned that PAT is about 4%, but I was going through the last 10 years data where I've seen the PAT of Indian automotive industry is pretty good. It's mostly it's been, I was just checking the number top companies, and I will share with you what has been the PAT for these top companies for the last 10 years. If I talk about the leading one of the top, two-wheeler makers, their PAT has been about 70 to 20% in the last 10 years. So similarly, I've seen PAT of 10%, 8% in most of the cases like top passenger vehicle manufacturers, or only in some cases we see below 5% or 5% kind of PAT. So profitability has always for the last 10 years, the automotive industry had a very good profitability. In such a scenario, was it that the automotive industry not protecting itself for any eventualities like this? And why was it that we don't keep ourselves ready to, cushion such impacts? How is it in the global market?
So, I think it is important to understand that automotive industry is a very captive intensive industry. New product development costs a lot of money. And if you really run across, there are always exceptions. If you run across, maybe, as I said, 3 to 9% is the PAT, depending on two-wheeler, three-wheeler. Maybe two-wheeler have the higher side, commercial vehicle is on the lower side. Now, with that kind of a profitability to keep reinvesting in the future as the norms keep, changing, whether it is the emission norms, the industry has collectively spent more than 60,000 crores to meet BS6 norms, crash norms, and then lots and lots of regulation that keep coming in. The point that I'm trying to make here is that we are looking at a temporary stopgap arrangement of demand stimulus, because I think with the GDP, if the GDP grows at 5-6%, automatically the industry will start, the demand will start moving. Because as I said, if more goods have to be moved, more trucks are required. If more and more infrastructure, road projects are there, then more tippers, more trucks are needed. More car carriers are needed. With the kind of, I think, the new normal that is coming in terms of the e-commerce, more goods have to be moved, so more LCVs will be required. Now, but I think we need a kickstart, a jump start. Unfortunately, there is a slowdown in the economy the last 2 years, and hence we've been talking of this kind of positive stimulus to the industry.
Have you seen some kind of typical, new kind of change among the customers or customer preferences? What are they liking, or where the customers are right now?
Okay, let me tell you, it is not exactly customers liking, but let me just expand your question into what are we seeing, in this troubled, difficult times. Are there any green shoots, of sorts that we have? So I think the one thing which is very important is that, there is going to be a preference for personal mobility, So people will earlier from shared mobility, we see a shift towards personal mobility, at least not in terms of getting translated into actual sales, but as a trend. It's a consumer behavior that we feel will change to personal mobility, which means small cars, two-wheelers will move in larger numbers, will have higher growth. We wish that happens. Also, as I was mentioning some time back, we will be more hesitant, to go and purchase things ourselves. So we would like to, so e-commerce is going to go up, consequent to which for movement of small cargoes and small items, small commercial vehicles, and also delivery boys coming on two-wheelers, whether it is a Zomato delivery or a FirstCry delivery or Amazon delivery. So we can see more and more two-wheelers. And this is moving very fast in big cities and small towns. Also, what we are seeing is that government has announced mega projects, both in the budget and in the Atmanirbhar package as well. Once that happens, we will definitely see demand coming from commercial vehicles, papers, etc. And even we see that there are announcements coming from small town cities, migrant labor which has moved back. There could be some arrangements of local industries, small scale industries, which will come up, which will move the demand. Then we're also seeing that agriculture has done very well in the last crop has been good. The next crop, again, the forecast is it will be good. So consequent to this, the agriculture prosperity will push up sales of commercial vehicles as well as for small personal vehicles. So we're already seeing the used car, industry there's a heightened activity in the used car industry. People would tend to buy a used car because coming from affordability, pressures. There are a lot of fiscal pressures around, and hence people will move to used cars. So all these kind of indicators are there, which will help to sort of boost the demand. But if the GDP overall, remains, as I had said earlier, of the order of -3%, -4%, then itself the level of, industry utilization would be of the order of 50 to 60% is what I had said.
Looking at the tractor sales, do you expect that the rural markets doing better than the urban markets in the coming few months? And by that, you mean that two-wheeler sales may return faster and entry-level car sales will return faster?
Yes, we see that. So there is a good, what we have heard, although we don't have a tractor manufacturer as our members, but reading it in the media, the numbers on the first week, tractor sales have been good. And it is generally being said that the tractor sales will be even better in the month of June. Tractor Manufacturing Association feels the numbers are going to be better. So there will be rural prosperity. I think there are a number of rural projects that have been announced by the government. Once they all start taking shape, so we are seeing heightened activity, in rural areas. So to that extent, I think demand will come from rural area. Our only worry is that the corona effect, consequent to the migrant labor moving back into rural areas, it should not spread to Mufassal towns and villages, because that will pose a very, big new threat. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that the sentiment of the healthy harvest will continue to, elevate the spirits in the rural India, so that, we get the higher consumer activity there going.
Coming back to your point of migrant laborers going back to the villages, so I just wanted to understand, because they may not be having cash at hand. Dispensable income of people in the rural India will be impacted, or will it be taken care of by the agricultural activity that is taking place in various parts of the country right now? Because next 3-4 months is very important for agricultural activity. So they might get to work there, and they can earn livelihood there. But is it incommensurate with the kind of earning they were making while they were working in factories or industries? So how do you see the
Nabil,
capacity
largely,
to create demand?
yeah. Largely, Nabil, the migrant labor more dominated in the in our vendor factories rather than OEMs. OEMs largely work with the permanent local workforce, or let me call it permanent workforce, that is almost local, whether they are from outside or where. But then they have in a way created infrastructure around. They have a house, they live there, their children study around. So it's not easy for them to move, and they haven't moved out yet, to my mind. I would assume so. But at our vendors, tier 2 and the tier 3 suppliers, there are quite a few migrant workers that work in those factories, and there they will face the problem as the ramp up goes up. But guys having gone back to the villages, I think the first few months, later on, if the Manrega schemes are announced, if there are activities that come around, maybe I think depending on the state of mind of individual, some may be satisfied with the small amount of money and staying safer than getting double the salary but staying maybe unsafe. So I think it's a question of individual preferences. And I think post-COVID, there are a lot of consumer behavior, lot of industry behavior, a lot of government behavior will change, which will create opportunities. I think one very big change that I can see post-COVID is change of localization. When I say localization, localization in all forms. Localization in the form that supply chains will be locally. If I am a Pune-based factory, I would make sure 100% of my supply is Pune-based. While that may not be feasible, but then there will be increased effort for localization of the supply chains.
So you are talking about micro localization also. You're talking about
yeah, exactly. That is one change that I'm seeing. By the same logic, I'm also seeing that migrant workers, I think there would be pressure on the local governments. The local governments will try to give them livelihood by generating industries within the rural area, small scale industries, different scale industries, agriculture processing, a value addition to the fruits, vegetable crops, etc. All that will emerge when more and more employment is provided locally. I think this will emerge to my mind, and hence maybe most of them would be happy working in the local areas than coming back, to where they originally worked. And that was going to generate other trends of automation, robotization, more and more backward integration by OEMs rather than, vending out. So I think the new normal is going to change quite a few of the practices that are currently going on for manufacturing.
Let's come back to the question of supply chain. You just talked about that is the biggest hindrance. Uh, uh, the hindrance that you are talking about, are they local or international also in nature? Because with high content of electronics and connected, we have seen dependence on China has increased a lot. And in your company also, Mahindra and Mahindra, a lot of connected solutions and electronics are imported from China, even for Tata Motors also. And we saw in the initial days of COVID, when it started in China, there was a huge setback on the production. So very many companies which are currently importing from China, these content especially, do you see they have some peculiar kind of major impact compared to the other manufacturer which have lesser dependence on international manufacturing hub like China or others?
Okay. Uh, so let me give you a brief perspective on why this has happened over a period of time. See, over a period of time, there have been number of regulations that have come in the auto industry, especially in the last, I think, 3 to 5 years. Let me start with the BS6, which is a very good regulation that reduces pollution, helps to improve the, let us say, the fuel efficiency, and thereby it is something that had to be done, as it is being done world over. Now the question is, when you push the time limit, many a times the capability is not there in your country for those kind of technologies. For example, we moved from BS4 to BS6 directly.
There also you have a lot of import.
In between, we did not move to BS5. Now, when you move from BS4 to BS6, largely for diesel technologies which are there present in all the commercial vehicles, you have a diesel particulate filter, then you move to an SCR kind of a technology. So we had to jump two technologies suddenly in one go. And the Indian component manufacturers are not ready for that technology. They did not have they could not be ready because in 3 years they could not have done their own engineering, set up their own manufacturing, done the validation and testing. So many of them have imported parts from either China or Europe. And why do they need to import the parts? Because those parts need scale. And in our country, still, we don't have the scale of the order. The scale is there in Europe or in China. So a lot of parts for BS6 are imported. They came from either China or they came from Europe, Spain, Italy, and Germany and those countries, which are being assembled by the Indian suppliers and given to the OEMs. Now the question is that if we were given probably 2 more years, a 5-year period window, and saying that nothing has to be imported, all of it has to be developed locally, maybe it is feasible. So I think the learning is when we push the boundaries of regulation into the country, we should not forget that it should not lead to import increase. For example, as you say, electronics is coming. Electronics is not just coming for fun. Electronics is coming for functionality improvement, for improving the driver safety, vehicle safety, for your connectivity, for your comfort, etc., etc. But all this is, when it is coming, like in other countries like Japan, Korea, there is a 10-year regulation plan. You know for 10 years what is coming, consequent to which you start developing, moving, etc. But if there is an urgency imposed, then I think you're optimizing regulation, but you're not optimizing the localization that is required in the country to build those capabilities and etc. etc. So I think it is a very important perspective to understand that all these things both need time and need knowledge of development. So as we move ahead, and as you rightly said, now the next big wave is going to be the wave of connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle. Autonomous does not mean fully driven.
Not level 4, 5.
Levels of autonomous vehicle. For example, maybe autonomous parking is the norm. Maybe highway, you could be autonomous, but the person is still present. Now, all these items would require an advanced driver assist system. All these things would require manufacturing of cameras, radars, their engineering. It will require software. It will require packaging, development, testing, validation, labs. Now, if you suddenly, thrust upon it in 2 years, you need this, then I think OEMs will then have to go outside India and defeat the basic purpose of make in India and localized in and local production in India. So I think it's a very fine balance. All of us have to understand that balance, and I think hopefully, we will
Catch up
as a nation.
I think, do you think COVID can be a medium to speed up this trend? Because if you look at the total component import that we have in India, that runs over $17 billion of import that we do. And I'm sure that these are not only electronics and the BS6 related, component, because that's been the level of import. We are a net importing country when it comes to auto components. So do you see any other reason why there has not been focus on R&D in India by the automotive value chain, be it component makers? I have seen that auto makers, means OEMs, are looking at designing their vehicles. They're looking at developing, R&D skills, capability, but still their tier 1, tier 2 suppliers are far away from adopting, local R&D or designing and development, especially those which are Indian companies. What has really, and the current level of, R&D spend is less than 1%, which is one of the lowest in the world. So what has really put the industry in such a situation?
Okay, very good question, very interesting question, very long question, and it's going to have a very long answer.
Sure, okay.
Well, so I think it is important to go back several years into history. We as a country, we know the know-how of manufacturing. The know-how of manufacturing has been there in our country maybe several decades. I would say for more than 100 years, we know manufacturing, yeah. And now comes the know-why of the design. We used to get the design from outside, but we became very competent in manufacturing, and that's the way it went on. Even the vehicle manufacturing came as collaborations with the global OEMs who gave those drawings, and those drawings were localized, assembled, and then we started production. However, there are within the auto industry, there are you have to separate the Indian OEMs and the global multinational OEMs. The Indian OEMs had resorted to collaboration, maybe so that they can enhance their knowledge from the manufacturing know-how to the design know-why, right? The design know-why talks of what type of steel, what kind of heat treatment, what kind of radius, what kind of a shape, etc., etc., is required to withstand the real world driving conditions, the loading patterns, the loads that come onto the vehicle, and hence have the individual ability to design to your own and make that as your own intellectual property. Now, some Indian OEMs have attempted that by collaborations or otherwise through setting up their own engineering centers. And I think they have been very successful, both in the two-wheeler domain. There are stories where people initially collaborated to learn the fine, print of manufacturing as well as the fine print of design. And I would now say that there are many OEMs in India who are developing products on their own. When I say developing products, means each and every part is designed by them in India by the Indian engineers. Now, next comes the manufacturing. Now, manufacturing of that part, not every part is made to the last drawing. Many parts have a final specification where, it is a fitment specification or a final output. But behind that, there is a black box that is getting supplied by world-class suppliers, like whether it is Bosch supplying or a Visteon supplying you a silver box for infotainment, for telematics, etc., etc. You just give the specifications. Now the question is, those kind of components, why are they not being made in India? Why are they coming from outside? The answer, Nabil, is in the scale. The Indian OEMs are, if they are selling 40, 50, 60,000 a month, and you cannot afford to develop a part with the toolings for 60,000 a year, right? The scale required runs into maybe 500,000. Now the suppliers who have plants for 500,000 in China, it is better and far cheaper to produce those parts in China or in Europe. So consequently, what has happened is the import content in our vehicles has gone up, and it has largely happened in, let us say, passenger vehicles or two-wheelers due to two reasons. One is not having enough scale. Second is the parts are far cheaper. Parts coming from China are cheaper than parts coming from India. And that is largely, again, their cost structure. I won't know, but they are very competitive. And we all know the competitiveness of China. Where does it come from? It comes from a particular process which makes their part competitive, and hence they are supplying to the world. So one reason, parts are cheaper. Second reason, it is too expensive to localize them in India. Consequently, the Indian OEMs have had no choice but to get those parts from either China or Europe. Now the global OEMs are have the similar story. Maybe they are bringing products that are, simultaneously developed for many countries of the world. A product coming from a global OEM is launched on the same day in 10 countries in the world, in 15 countries in the world. It has volume scale of 500,000 units produced every year. So 500,000 units are produced in one location, but that part is being imported, maybe a critical part. I think our suppliers, our members of SIAM have attempted as high as 90% localization, but 10% import would still remain consequent to the scale which is missing. And we need to get to scale so that, our import content goes there. And if we have a constraint that we should not import those parts, then those parts, if to be produced in India, will become very expensive, and the cars will become even more expensive. So it's a chicken and an egg story. I think it's a balance that is required, but I would agree with you that as a country, we have to encourage product development in the country. If we really want our nation, to come up, it is not just through manufacturing, because manufacturing will give you some amount of capability that we already have in the last 100 years. But ability to develop new products will give you the competitiveness that we will have in the world. And typically, Nabil, you may know that it is the auto industry worldwide that provides product development engineers to all the industry, whether it is aerospace industry, whether it is defense industry. Engineers from auto industry have actually gone into those industries and multiplied, because after all, the vehicle systems, by and large, whether it is an air conditioning system, thermal management, structural load management, validation and testing, is on of a similar kind and scale. So therefore, I would support your point that R&D expenses in India should go up from 1% to what is done in the world 3%. That is, more and more of product development happens in the country than just get the drawing and produce the part. The real capability as a nation lies in our ability to be able to produce a drawing, which means understanding the design, know why. And I think it needs a revolution like the Industry 4.0, which is the fourth industrial revolution in manufacturing, which is coming thanks to IoT, data analytics, etc., etc. I think product development 4.0 or 2.0 is also required in the country, where we do not have cars coming in developed elsewhere in the world, but developed in India completely. And I can't agree more with that philosophy of yours. But that needs both determination, and it needs passion, and it needs providing infrastructure. It needs a consortium products between industry, government, and education system, so that these capabilities are built in. And I think maybe post-COVID, the pressure of localization, self-atmanirbharta will probably push the new normal in product development.
So you mean that we need to think, not only think about make in India, but also to design and develop in India. That's
Absolutely.
the idea.
Absolutely.
Coming back to the new normal, or we talk about what are we really going to unlearn from the pre-COVID time, or what should we unlearn from the pre-COVID time in the post-COVID time, so that we are able to achieve that self-reliance that our Honorable Prime Minister has given a call for?
Yeah, I think as specifically I will talk of the auto industry.
Yeah.
We got to have, as I said earlier also, we'll have to create our own safety nets. It's important. God forbids anything of similar scale or something happens. Therefore, if we have to be prepared for another crisis 10, 15 years down the road, we need to create our own safety nets, firewalls. So therefore, I would strongly suggest a much larger and a stronger local supply chains within the country, and that too closer to the manufacturing plants, which would mean maybe the backward integration will go up for the current manufacturers. And we have to be more dependent on the local workforce. I think that will emerge another trend. We have to adopt digital technology as well as there will be a lot of automation required. And there is, fortunately, in the country in the last 2-3 years, a lot of focus on cobos, mechatronics, automation, robotics. This will take off in a big way. I think as I said, digital technology.
Do you see India has one of the biggest advantage, or you can say the edge, when it comes to providing skilled manpower? Do you think this edge weakening because of the machines and the automation and digitization taking over? Is it going to be substantial, or you see only marginal minus plus there?
No, I won't see it increasing very fast, but it will definitely, the rate of introduction of automation will be much higher than what we have seen in the last decade, coming from two things. One is, although worker is skilled and worker is cheaper, but don't forget there is a requirement of repeatability and reproducibility in the product. Repeatability and the reproducibility can only be guaranteed by automation, because you have removed the skill from the worker and put it in the machine. And machine does not depart from that process of whether it is welding a nugget at a location or doing an arc welding of a particular depth from end to end. Worker may forget, worker may not be, so hence the repeatability and the reproducibility, the quality requirements, the accessibility requirements, the safety requirements, where there can be situations which can lead to accidents, even maybe once in 2 years, 4 years. But still, I think the focus is going to be the social distancing, which may not be possible if humans have to work together. But robots can all work together. 10 robots can work simultaneously on a car, but 10 workers may not be, able to work together because of the social distancing requirements. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it is not just the cheaper skill that will prohibit the use of automation. Automation will come in. Automation, yes, is expensive, and the kind of volumes still, if we reach those scales of what we have in China or US or Europe for that matter, then of course robots are cheaper and better.
How far have we pushed the 5 million target that we had for passenger vehicles?
Well, I would say most of our members have pushed it by showing their intent of installing the capacities. Yeah. So capacities have been installed in the country for 5 million vehicles. The new product development that is going on in the pipelines with most of the OEMs is an intent towards that. I think
how much delay do you,
the rapid exports that all of us are doing is an indication of that intent. But I think what has hit us is the GDP degrowth and some specific actions which have also, resulted in degrowth, particularly in the commercial vehicle areas. Axle loading norms, which suddenly overnight increased 25% capacity of the trucks in the country. Now, if you grow at the rate of 8%, you will take 3 to 4 years to reach to that capacity, which got increased suddenly overnight. It didn't benefit anyone. So if you don't get into such knee-jerk, reactions, but obviously COVID is something which we didn't anticipate. So therefore, we really need to grow fast to reach to 5 million. It's all set in terms of the capacities by and large.
We are running out of time. We have only 5-7 minutes left before we start taking questions from the audience. So 2-3 quick questions. I would request if you could give me short answers so that we can take questions from the audience also.
Number one, also short, Nabil.
Yeah, I'll try to keep my questions short also and straight. The stimulus package that was given for especially for the MSME, how do you see the suppliers benefiting from it, be it the definition or the loan they were to offer? Because I hear from many that they are not able to access those emergency loan. Do you have any other take on that?
Well, see, I represent the Society of the OEMs. MSME benefits have gone to ACMA, Auto Component Manufacturing Association, and their
but
members.
They are your supplier. Have you seen
that's fine. So I in my capacity as SIAM president, I have to tell you that I am only aware of the fact that it is going to benefit them. Now the finer details of that, how it is going to benefit a 1 crore guy getting to a 5 crore revenue, or his investments which were earlier at 5 lakhs, he can now go to 50 lakhs, and thereby what are the challenges? I think all these things will benefit once we come to the growth phase. If there is no growth, then all these things will remain on paper.
What kind of job losses do you see? Because you have already indicated the pain point, and they all hint towards it.
I think it is anybody's guess at 50% of the capacity utilization, it is anybody's guess what kind of job losses will be there. As I said, it will be more on the component side because, the ability and the sheer processes which are there of temporary manpower are far more in the tier 2 and the tier 3 suppliers than in the tier 1 or the global OEMs. For that.
No, even in OEM, we still have substantial amount of contract and non-permanent workers, even in the leading ones that I see around. So it's more than 40%, 45%. I see in some cases going up to 50%
I
also.
think if there is no work for a longer duration of time, obviously there is no ability to sustain that manpower.
Do you think exports, how do you see exports as an opportunity in a situation where the COVID impact is quite democratic across the world? It has impacted almost every country in the world, barring one or two small ones. So do you see this as an export opportunity still there, and how can one leverage that opportunity?
So, well, I think there are two kinds of scenarios in export. One is where you have your own channels, distributors, which will remain hopefully loyal to you, understand the problem. And if they have problems of similar problems like we have in our country, if they have those problems in their country, then obviously exports will be subdued. But fortunately, in some areas where they don't have those problems, our ability to supply to them will determine our growth. So therefore, in some areas, exports will be an opportunity. And in other areas where, let's say, we are not able to supply because of our supply chain problems, then we will lose those markets to maybe somebody else. Maybe Chinese will come in. Maybe Korean will take over, maybe Japanese will sell in those markets where we are selling, but we are not able to sell because we are not able to produce. So I think it is a very specific, Nabil. There is no generic thing saying that exports can take off. It is basically segment-wise, how deep you are in that market, how dependent is that market onto you. Is that market suffering from similar COVID issue as you are? If it is not, then some of our members are doing extremely well. Some of our two-wheeler, three-wheeler suppliers, members are doing extremely well in export markets even today. They will continue to do well. And some of them, which are in markets which are having COVID problems, are unfortunately not able to supply to them because there are no orders. And also, we are just starting the supply chain. April, there was nothing. May, the total industry figures in May was what? 12%, 88% it was down. So therefore, I think there is no one answer that exports is going to boom for us, not immediately.
Coming back to the local market, do you see any segment-wise peculiarity in terms of positive or negative impact of the COVID in passenger vehicle space?
As I said that we are seeing good growth coming in for two-wheelers, three-wheelers. As I mentioned, largely because of good urban, good semi-urban, rural sentiment, as well as agriculture-led growth, which puts in money in the hands of the farmer, which we see transforms into good motorcycle, scooter, two-wheeler sales. And also, as I said, personal mobility will be preferred over shared mobility. So people will try to buy their own vehicles. And that can be, small cars or big cars, depending on your affordability. So we see these two segments picking up. We see small commercial vehicle segment picking up because of e-commerce. But medium and heavy commercial vehicle remains to be a very, very big worry, because that mirrors the economy. And as economy starts growing, and the medium and heavy commercial will grow.
Yeah, my next question, I just wanted to understand, how do you see the electric mobility, evolving in this time?
Well, I have no reasons to believe that electric mobility will slow down. I think electric mobility has a specific niche at the moment. So, in my opinion, for the commercial purposes, where kilometers run per day are much more than for personal usage, electric vehicles will see higher acceptability in the e-commerce domain, and hence I don't see any reason for electric vehicle impetus to suffer.
Okay, now let's start the questions from the audience. I'll take my first question from Yash Karla. What is the growth, degrowth forecast for auto sector? I think you have already said 25 to 45%, but it's a quite wide range.
So
How
that is for
fairly,
segments to segment. I think
okay,
it is
okay.
segment to
Oh,
segment.
so how fairly would scooter and motorcycle industry
I
do?
think
Can we
scooter
expect some
motorcycle would
GST
be
cut?
in the lower side, 20 to 25 maybe.
Okay, okay. And what about passenger vehicle?
Passenger vehicle could be of the order of 25%.
Okay. And when do you see the demand, are we achieving the level of 3.3 million or 2 million units that we achieved a year ago? How long will it take for us
So
to
it's a
achieve
function
that?
of it's a function of consumer sentiments and a function of GDP growth. So if we see GDP growth happening of the order of 6 to 7% next year and the year after that, maybe in 3 years from now, we could reach back to those volumes.
Yeah. Next question comes from Rajiv Saxena. When will CV industry go up? How much time will it take? What are the government policies for overcoming the current situation for EVs specifically?
Okay,
Good.
so CV industry is, as I said, it mirrors the GDP. If there are more goods to be moved from factories, and we will need more trucks, more roads to be built, we'll need more tippers. So construction vehicle, CV industry, commercial vehicle industry will move once the GDP starts growing.
Next question from Pashi Muthu. He wants to know what kind of policy amendment or strategy that can be expected by the government of India to crank the demand in PV segment.
Well, we have been talking with the government, and we have put in all our requests to the government. So far, government has not agreed to the request of the GST reduction, but I think they're working on something else called a scrappage policy. These are the two kind of things immediately we have asked government, because the vehicles have become very expensive in the last 3 to 5 years, consequent to various regulations that have come in, consequent to registration, road taxes, which are a state matter, going up from something like 5% to 13-14%. All these things have made vehicles very expensive. So we have been talking to the government to see how the tax structure can be reduced.
Another question comes from Anup Singh. Hello, sir. How this COVID situation impacts new product launches and increase product in a product portfolio? Looking at the sales down, do you see expansion in the product portfolio, and how do you see the new launches coming up?
See, product portfolio does not get mm, uh, expanded overnight just because COVID has come or not come. You expand your product portfolio. Product portfolio is in the pipeline, and depending on the kind of a product, it typically takes from 3 to 5 years, depending on how much the change is. So products are always in the pipeline, and it's an honest effort of the organization to keep the products coming at regular intervals, and it is the future, and therefore new products will always be there in the pipeline. It's a matter of time. You may like to delay the launch of a new product because you're going to you're going to spend a lot of money on the launch, and the new product has to be handled differently in the marketplace. But if the demand is not there, you may like to not launch a new product for 3 to 6 months, 9 months, and wait for demand to be there. or depending on you have such a good product where the customers would want that kind of a product if there is value in the product. So those are the kind of considerations which are important to launch or not to launch.
Our next question from Ajay Juneja. He wants to ask how to ensure Siam and tier 1 vendors release payment to their MSME ancillary suppliers who are in effects due to funds stuck with them. So he's asking about the payment to MSME. Yeah.
I think as far as I am informed, all our OEMs have paid to their suppliers. Whether their suppliers have paid to their suppliers or not there, I'm not in a position to answer.
Oh, thank you. Next question from Prasad Kurudankar. In prevailing conditions, buyer potential sentiment versus re-rolling of business have become chicken and egg story. How to break it?
I wish we had the answer.
Okay, next question comes from Sandeep Gupta, and he wants to know, with urban market showing stress in PV ownership in past couple of years, coupled with massive income disruption due to stringent lockdown, are you getting some feelers reinforcing silver line seems to be in non-urban market owing to uptick in crop yield and the government of India pushing funds? If so, what OEMs are doing different to reach to potential customers and bridge deficit in volumes?
So I think this trend and the consumer behavior change, one is mindful of this, that it is not that because urban is going down and rural is coming up. Rural, first of all, is not only agriculture. I think we have to understand that rural India does not mean only agriculture. Rural India also has other small industries, cottage industries, a lot of other services which are coming up. As a consequence, the demand for vehicles is going up. PVs is going up in the rural or semi-urban India as well. And OEMs and our members are mindful of this fact. So you will see that products that are more suitable for the semi-urban rural areas in terms of the functionality that they need are coming up. For example, the variants, very specific variants which will appeal to more to a rural Mufassal customer more than a city customer. So more functional, more utilitarian variants are being produced. And we are seeing a shift of growth. There is growth in the rural part of the country, and that growth is actually slowly driving the numbers.
Next question comes from Ramesh Sundarajam. While the CV makers are pushing for a scrappage policy to boost new vehicle sales, the vehicle owners are up against it. What is the Siam's advice to resolve this, so that there is no voice from the industry to the government? So I think this is some question.
Okay, so Nabil, the original scrappage policy discussion started some 4 or 5 years back.
More than 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Yeah,
several years ago. I think the narrative against the old vehicle was, those vehicles are more than 15-year-old vehicles. They are not even BS0. So those vehicles, one, were fuel guzzlers. Number two, they were heavily polluting. So at that point in time, if there was a need for a scrappage policy, it came from the fact that we have to protect the environment and cannot have polluting vehicles, cannot have unsafe vehicles being 20-year-old, and cannot have fuel guzzlers to protect the energy security of the country. There was a narrative against old vehicles. Now, somehow, I think while framing a policy for this, there are compulsions of the government in terms of the livelihood of people who run the old trucks. So there is something that is getting discussed, and the narrative has now completely moved from that narrative, at least in the public domain. But not otherwise. That narrative still remains that it has to address all those problems. To generate demand, there should be a scrappage policy. But I think these discussions are on, and we will wait and see when the policy gets announced.
When do we see? We have seen that the announcements coming up, that is coming up very soon. Do you think government still has this policy as focus?
I can't comment on that. Our last meeting with Mr. Gadkari, he did say that they are serious about this policy, and the new secretary who has taken over is working on this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vadra, for joining Iti Auto live session of Fireside Chat. Thank you so much for taking all the questions and being candid. I'm sure the industry must have benefited from your expertise and the answers that you have given, and they can really use it to maneuver through this difficult time. Just to briefly put what you have said, that the automotive industry is going to decline in the range of 25 to 45%. GDP is likely to degrow beyond 3%, minus 4%, around minus 4%. That's what you expect. You see, if the situation continues to be like this, there could be a massive job loss that we can see. Another big hindrance is that supply chain problem, that you are not getting adequate supply, and even if you get supply, you are able to produce, will there be a demand? That's the another major concern that you have talked about. Yeah. Talking about the positive or the green shoots, we see that rural market will be doing better, and these are some key takeaways that comes out from the session. Thank you so much once again for joining.
Thank you, Nabil.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for asking
very much
questions. Keep engaged with Iti Auto for all the latest news and update. We'll be back with another panel discussion very soon. Keep following Iti Auto. Thank you so much once again for joining.
Thank you, Nabil. Thank you very much.